Bears are a laughing stock. This is
Yeah.
where we're at. Like it was a nice run with Lovey for the 8-9 years he was in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Resulted in 2 NFC championship games, 1 Super Bowl appearance. But since then, it's just been, they're a joke. It's brutal. It sucks. But let me put it this way. When your team's analysts, fanalists, bloggers become really good at NFL draft stuff, that means you're in the bottom of the league.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's nothing interesting enough to keep you out of NFL draft content. It's the most interesting thing you can think of every single year. And I love draft. If the Bears were making the playoffs, I wouldn't be spending the time on the draft stuff.
No,
I'd
absolutely not.
be breaking down what they're doing on the field.
The game is won and lost in the trenches, and sometimes it's lost by scoring 3 points in a Thursday night game. An O-line that was projected to be the 11th ranked line in the league ends the season as part of a crew that gave up 68 sacks. Not all 68 their fault, but enough to ask the question, what went wrong, what went darnell right, and what's next? So, on this episode of Bears in the Neighborhood, with special guest Quinten Krzysko from OnTap Sports Net. What did we learn about the Bears O-line this season?
So yeah, the Bears O-line, hot topic of conversation throughout the entire season. There's a lot to dive into here, and that's why I'm super thrilled to welcome a guest to the Bears in the Neighborhood podcast, as Chirag mentioned, Quinten Krzysko of OnTap Sports Net. He breaks down film on X. You can find him there. And he does a great job of kind of dissecting what's right, what's wrong, and how they can improve. So, Quinten, I'll throw that question over to you. How did the Bears end up? I know injuries play a large part of it, but I think they had like 27 different combinations or something at some point. Like, how does that happen?
Poor planning. It's poor planning. Like it's roster construction. It's because I was at the start of the season, I was sitting there going, I can see if stuff goes kind of right here, this O-line can be serviceable, right? But then the injuries stack up. When you have quality depth but poor starters, the poor starters tend to get injured pretty quick, right? And then your quality depth is no longer depth. They're just poorer starters. So that's kind of how you end up there. And it's like, if you want to go in the name by name, like, was Ryan Bates ever really a good plan? Was like, I mean, when they traded for Ryan Bates, I flipped on his film. I looked at it, I was like, they still need a center. Like, and then it was like they signed Coleman Shelton, and I actually got like Stockholm syndrome of like, this guy can start in the NFL. That doesn't make him a good center. There's only about 10 good centers in the NFL. Like,
Isn't that
most teams don't have one. But yet, go ahead, Samir.
I was gonna say, did Coleman Shelton remind you of Lucas Patrick at all, or were you more excited about Shelton?
He was better than Lucas Patrick.
Okay.
Even in hindsight, he was better than Lucas Patrick. Like they're different centers. Like so the way I always put it with center is you have one of two archetypes. You want to get into like your NBA 2K archetypes, right? Your first one is a undersized guy who's fast. And he can get out in space. He can get on the move. He can go hit linebackers at the second level. That's what Coleman Shelton is. They can't anchor. They can't take on zero techniques head on. Like when a 350-pound dude tries to bull rush him, they're not going to be able to block him. But the other archetype can block him, but he just can't move. He's just like a rock. Those are your two centers that you have to choose from for most of the league, except for unless you have one of those like 10 is probably even generous. One of those like 6 or 7 guys who can kind of do both.
So Ben Johnson, then, what does he have a type for center? Do you think he wants the guy that can get to the second level to spring a Swift or something if he gets past the trenches? Or is he more looking for the stable rock kind of guy, do you think?
Well, if we're going off Detroit, in Detroit he had Frank Ragnow, who can do a little bit of both. But Frank Ragnow's one of those like 6 or 7 guys. But if Ragnow fits in one pool more than the other, it's more the the stable rock who doesn't move as well. He's just so powerful that he can make it work. Like he doesn't need to get clean up to the second level and take a backer out. He just needs to get a hand on it because he's so powerful. So typically with teams who run a bit more gap run concept, which the best way to explain this, if you're not well familiarized with it, zone run schemes are very movement based and get in the way based. So it's like
Okay.
we want our guys moving as one and just getting in the way. And there's not a defined hole here that we're trying to open. We're not trying to open off the left guard's hip. We're trying to open any of five, six different holes. And the running back gets to choose. He's looking, scanning,
Mm,
and he gets to choose where he's going. Now, in a gap run scheme, you are saying we are blowing that hole open off the left guard's hip. We are definitely moving these guys off the line of scrimmage right there, and the running back is going to be right behind them and hit that home run. So that's more like the Lions ran a bit. It was, like 50-50 zone gap, but that's a pretty hefty mix of gap for the league.
Was there 50-50 because they had kind of two like different sort of running backs who could accomplish different things?
Possibly to a degree. I mean, I think that Jahmyr Gibbs does fit the gap scheme a little better because he's that home run hitter, right? Like
hmm
typically your gap scheme guy, you want to be able to break it to the house when you hit those blocks right. Now, David Montgomery is typically like even with the Bears, his time with the Bears, more of a zone run scheme guy, but he did get faster in his career because I mean, I don't know if you guys remember this. He'd
Yeah.
actually retrained himself how to run and actually picked up some speed from doing that. If you want to get into
Oh shit.
biomechanics of all this stuff, it gets
Yeah.
really wild. Like
That's
when you talk about guys
crazy.
been running wrong his whole life, I don't want to know how badly I've been running for years, but
That's crazy. Yeah.
Dude, just as like a side note to that, so I was working out with a trainer for a while who was teaching high schoolers, like training high school athletes, and I learned I didn't know how to jump correctly. I would like jump up and my arms would be down. He's like, put your arms up in the air, and you watch these kids, and I thought the same thing. I would make the NFL, but it's like, holy shit, there's like these tiny little things that if you get taught how to do correctly, that's a minor little speed adjustment, a minor little strength adjustment that like in a game where everybody is fucking fast and strong, like that little 16th of a second is now the difference between breaking that gap and not breaking that gap. That's
And I
super
think that
interesting.
applies mostly to offensive line too, because it's a very technique focused position skill group, right? I mean, the smallest little thing you can tweak to your game, your hand position, your feet position, your leverage can really, right? Q take you to like from an average player to like a good player.
in the words of any given Sunday, it's a game of inches, right? It's
hmm
all timing and angles. That's all football ultimately comes down to, especially when we're talking about the run game and offensive line. Timing and angles. Did you hit your spot on time? Did you hit your angle right? If you can do those two things, you're going to be able to move the football on the ground. Like that there's a
Yeah.
reason why running has been such a staple in football for so long because it's that type of thing. You rep it, you rep it, you rep it. You get those guys going like clockwork, you're going to be able to move that football.
Let's talk combine because we just kind of went through that, and everything I've been reading and everything I've been listening to you guys and other people is there's probably three offensive linemen that are in play for the Bears. Booker, I'm gonna exclude him because that might be a little bit of a reach. But we got Membo, who had a great combine, Campbell, who's kind of just been that guy, in the top, whatever, and then Calvin Banks, who doesn't really get fans excited, but he's, his name's thrown out there. He's got great measurables. Of those three, um, do you think any of them would get drafted by the Bears to play tackle, or do you think the Bears are taking whoever that is and moving them to a guard position if they take one of those three?
The only guy of those three that I would say is a guard through and through is Kelvin Banks. Like I
Oh
think
yeah,
Kelvin
okay.
Banks is a offensive guard. I watch his tape, and that has nothing to do with arm length. It has nothing to do with anything like that. Any of the testing. It's just the tape. Like the guy plays football like a guard. How do like how do tackles win in the NFL, right? Like they're playing in space. They don't have a 300-pounder head up on them all game
Mm-hmm.
that they're needing to be able to get into and get physical with. They win in space. When I watch Kelvin Banks, I see a guy who actually struggles a little more with space, but man, when he's able to get clean shots on guys right in front of him, he brings that power, he brings that aggression, and that's what I want in offensive guard. But with Will Campbell, you get a really interesting conversation because the guy does show some of that tenacity. Not on the same level as a Kelvin Banks, but he does show some of it, and he has the short arms. But
Mhm.
when I really did, and I've spent way more time than any sane person should thinking about this, but um, when it comes down to it, and you really get into his tape over and over and over, me, I start to see a guy who wins in space really well. That's his biggest strength. His
Okay.
footwork, his timing, his angles in space against guys who are probably smaller than him, because most edge rushers are smaller than him. Going inside, you're not dealing with guys who are smaller than you anymore. You're dealing with equal size.
Yeah.
Will Campbell's strength is his power combined with his foot speed. And when you bring that element of this guy is no longer smaller than you, that's where I start to question, like, well, I don't know how much I want him at guard. I really like him at tackle. I know the short arms is a whole thing. I
Hmm.
know it's an outlier, but I think the Bears might take him at 10, and I think they should plan for him to be the left tackle of the future if they do.
So for our audience, can you just clarify why short arms is such a big metric for tackles?
Because so if we're talking about at offensive guard first, like when you're a guard, you need a really powerful anchor. You need to be able to absorb power as someone gets it into you because you're not going to win clean that often, right? It comes down to that space again. That guy's on top of you. Like you're gonna win some reps, make first contact sometimes. There's gonna be a lot of times where you won't, and that's where that ability to anchor down and say, I'm gonna absorb this power through my hips, bring it back down to the ground, and force it back into you. That's a big thing at offensive guard. It's big at tackle too, but again, it's not as big at tackle because you're usually dealing with guys who are smaller than you. So it's
Yeah,
not like
speed guys.
I don't think Braxton Jones anchor could survive at guard personally because
Yeah,
it's been an issue at tackle. If it's an issue at tackle, I think it's only gonna get louder at guard.
yeah,
But so being able to make that first contact at tackle is big because your guys usually don't have that elite anchor. They might like Darnell Wright has an outstanding anchor. He's rare though. Like that is not something that you
mm,
see all that often. So if you can't just let because when the anchor gets important, right? It's when a guy gets into your chest. Guy gets into your chest, into your pads, and is getting you backwards because if you think about like leverage, right? If you're coming up on someone and on their
yep,
chest, you're able to get them going backwards. But that arm length it's an eraser with that because you can say you can change the position because you have the longer arms. Guy gets into your chest, you can still bench press him off you, or you can make the first contact and completely take him out of the rep to
yeah.
begin with, and toss him out that way, toss him out that way because again he's usually smaller than you. So football, it's so
Yeah,
funny. A lot of it really just come down to I'm just bigger than you, but
yeah. Well, you can control the point of attack, right? If you make first
right,
contact, you can dictate the action that needs the reaction rather than being the one to react. And
right.
so, okay, okay. No, that's a great breakdown. I'm gonna. So we talked about those three guys, and it sounds like you like Campbell at tackle, you like Banks at guard. What are your thoughts on Membo?
A Membao, I think he can. Yeah, I would try him at tackle. Like I
Okay,
would have no issue trying him at tackle. I have no issue starting him at guard and moving him to tackle. I have a few more concerns about doing that with Campbell than
okay.
I do a guy like Membao. Like I think you can still try it with Campbell, but like I am a little nervous thinking like, well, what if it doesn't work and then you don't have left guard again? But um, with Membao, I think he can play guard. I think he can play tackle. I think the guard aspect is a nice kind of floor for him though, where like if it doesn't work at tackle, you can still kick him at guard. My only concern with him at guard comes down to, and this isn't being talked about a lot right now, and I think it's odd that it's not. It either means that it's a non-issue and all the insiders know it already, like the guys like Dane Brugler are hearing it from scout NFL teams and like getting good reasons, so they're just not prying on it. Um, but Mbau's run blocking is a mess.
Mm.
It's a mess. There are questions on his tape to me of, was that an effort issue? Was that a confusion issue? He just looked like he was kind of lost and didn't put a lot into
Mm.
that rep, and like that's where I get a little worried about a guy kicking inside to guard, is that you need to be the power player on run plays. You know, you need to be dictating the situation. And when I see a guy who's kind of taking perceived taking reps off or maybe lost. I hate to call out effort without having a better idea of, because there is
Sure.
so
Yeah.
much that can be happening out there. But like there are just moments with him in the run game where I'm like, I don't understand why you didn't hit that guy, didn't push him out of the run lane, didn't do something more because you were capable of it. And that's where I hesitate with him at guard a little. But and that's why honestly I like him at tackle better, because
Okay.
I don't worry as much about that at tackle, because you're not the power player in the run game at tackle as often. You are a complementary piece to the run blocking scheme at tackle, where at guard you are a point player.
Do you think then, I mean, and I guess to both of you all, is basically every position on the Bears line like up for grabs then? Like maybe
Save one.
Darnell Wright, I guess. But besides that, everyone else is like replaceable fully.
Yeah, I mean, I think Braxton's your starting left tackle this year, regardless. Like if it's Campbell, I think you're playing Campbell at guard this year, and maybe he's your long-term plan at tackle. If you're taking Mbao, I think same thing. And like I said with Banks, I think he's a guard regardless. But so I think Braxton is going to get one last shot here to really prove it, and I also think they're not that, like I shouldn't say they're not that worried, but they want to give Karan Amagaji his shot to win left tackle too.
Yeah.
I mean, they
Yeah.
drafted
That's
him a
true.
year ago. He was not supposed to play last year. He did play. It was awful. That was predictable. He showed a lot of really good traits. Not good play, but good traits where you say the right coach is looking at this guy going, he can be a really good football player if I get my hands on him.
I'd almost forgotten about Kieran Amagaji just because maybe my brain had just been like, let's just not talk about this guy right now because of his
Yeah,
debut.
I
But
feel like
that's a good
anytime
point.
Well,
anytime he
and
came up, it was like not great on this podcast.
It's interesting. There's this podcast called the Offensive Line Committee, or maybe just the O Line Committee. It's two former offensive linemen, and they were talking about like when you draft a really developmental prospect on the offensive line, what is the timeline for them? And these guys, they were in NFL locker rooms with guys like this, and they were talking really definitively through it of like year one, shouldn't see the field. Year two, they can be a swing guy. Year three, if they're
Wow.
going to be anything, that's when they can start. Like that's
Interesting.
when. So ever since I heard that, it's like, okay, well, that's the timeline for Quran. Like next year,
Yeah.
this coming season should be like you're a swing guy. Maybe you'll get some chances here and there. Basically, what he was last year should be his year two, and then year three is when it's like, okay, now you're getting your shot to win this job.
That's almost like how quarterbacks used to be, right?
Yeah,
It's like you'd sit the rookie year and then you'd get a couple reps and then it's like, okay, now you're ready to take the field. And now just like quarterbacks, we throw these tackles out there. Like Joe Alt is, he was drafted whatever. He was the starter. And I mean, I think he performed fine, but maybe that's kind of like an outlier these days in terms of performance.
man, the difference in play level that these guys are that we're talking about with, like, so Brandon Thorne, like the O line, like content god, like
Hmm.
he does these series with draft prospects, right? And I'm not gonna say draft prospects names, but like um he did it with three of the like top, or three or four of the top offensive linemen in the class from big Power Four schools. And man, these guys are talking football at such a high level. And you can tell they're processing this stuff so fast, and their recall is just wild of what they're remembering about each rep, each player, what their tendencies are. And
Wow.
then he does one with a guy from a like a D2 school. I think it was D2 or maybe FBS. But from a much smaller school, like on caliber with a Yale for a size of an Ivy League. And it's just not like the guy is very talented, and he's like, props to him. He's gotten this far. I think he's gonna have a future in the NFL, but it's gonna take time because he just has a lot of processing to learn, a lot of how to see the game that fast to learn. And that's just one college level versus another, not even college versus NFL. It is a major jump to go from Yale to the NFL. That speed difference is insane.
Yeah, it's and we saw it right on the field. I want to go back to center real quick, and I know you did a whole YouTube video on Drew Dahlman, and I want to talk a little bit about him. He seems to, now that Trey Smith, while still possible to acquire, the road just became harder to get him, right? So everybody's kind of turning their attention to like, all right, Drew Dahlman, right? He's probably going to be the top center that's commanded here in free agency. My question is, how much of his success do you think was predicated on having Lindstrom and Bergeron on either side of him? Do you think that really elevated his play? And that's a two-part question. The second part would be like, can Coleman Shelton be 80% of Drew Dahlman if you get him two guards that are competent also on the side? Would that be a better use of the Bears' resources?
So I think that's an outstanding question. It's something that I've thought about myself of like, I think it comes through more in pass protection than anything because I think that's his biggest weakness, right? Him as a run block, Drew Dahlman as a run blocker, he fits that first bucket of centers that we talked about. Very movement based, undersized, but athletic and like physical. But he's not going to be your powerhouse there either. So in the Falcons run scheme, they run a lot of they're outside wide zone based scheme, like a Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay style offense. If we're talking about the roots of it, that's what he excels in, and that's what's an odd fit with Ben Johnson, right? And that's one of the things that's made me kind of a little more hesitant on whether Drew Dahlman should like whether paying him a big paycheck makes a lot of
15,
sense for the
16.
Bears. Yeah. Now I do think those guards aid him a lot, but I think it's mostly in pass protection because I think when you're talking about a zone run scheme, I think that he is about as good as it gets in his own run scheme. Like he has been kind of one of the standard setters for a run blocker in that movement based horizontal zone offense. Like that's a wide zone, outside zone. So I can get into the difference of those if you guys want me to. I don't want to take up all the time either.
Maybe for another one, but like, okay, so I guess then, how do you feel about, you said Shelton is also in that first bucket, right? The guy that's smaller can get up to the second pad level. So how close is he to it? Is like Dahlman still like leaps and bounds ahead of Shelton, where it'd be like, no, that's a very clear upgrade? Or do you feel like, hey, we get the two guard spots right, we can roll, Shelton can be a starting center. We don't have to break the bank 15, $16 million a year or whatever for somebody like Dahlman.
I think I just don't think you're in a point where you can play with it anymore. Like you had your speculative year last year. Not now you need real hard answers, otherwise you're on the hot seat again if you're Ryan Poles.
True.
So that makes it tough. Like I think Shelton might be like I don't want to say 80%, maybe 60% Dahlman.
Okay.
I think they're pretty similar in pass protection. I think Dahlman's just a better run blocker. Yeah, I think he's got to flank either guy with big guards, but I think your frequency of errors is probably a lot lower with Dahlman. Whereas with Shelton, it seems like it's a week to week basis of whether like there are games where he's clean and there are games where it's like there were four big uh-oh moments and the rest was really clean, but like those four moments are a big deal.
And Dahlman's pretty young, right? He's mid-20s or something like that,
Yeah, I
or
want
upper
to say like
20s?
26.
26. So that probably takes Jared Wilson off the table if they were to sign Dahlman, right? There's really no reason to have Wilson.
Yeah, I think it becomes really hard to justify spending probably a second round pick on Jared Wilson if you're and I know that's not where he's going in mocks, but like I have a third round grade on him, and I think if you want him, you probably gotta take him in the second round. Otherwise, like you're risking not getting him. But that's a lot to spend at center when you just spent that cash at center at the same time.
Would you feel more comfortable with like a Ryan Kelly, Jared Wilson combo, or would you feel more comfortable with Drew Dahlman?
To me, Ryan Kelly, Jared Wilson was what I was hoping for coming into the offseason because that gives you, Ryan Kelly's had some injury issues. You're probably not gonna have to pay him as much, but
Hmm.
he's a better fit for Ben Johnson's run offense. Like he is one of the centers who can do both. But his injury issues are an issue. Like, and he's up
Yeah,
there in age, so it becomes a whole like, well, can you trust him to be around all year? But that's what if you can get Jared Wilson with that, that's really nice. But this draft class makes that tough though, because there's only really one center. You're sitting there saying
that's
that's the
it. Yeah.
ticket right there.
Okay, so as we kind of get close to the end of this one, I feel like I'm sitting in class. This shit's been dope to like hear this. Like, so thank you for doing all of that. But as we kind of think about, yeah, as we kind of get to the sort of end of today's episode, like, what does your sort of ideal draft for the Bears look like? What does maybe the offensive line kind of look like? Sort of the shape that you're hoping for that it'll be taking.
To me, ideally, I mean, so you go get a guard and a center in free agency, um, whoever those might be, and then you have one guard spot kind of open. I hope you get a guy who is at least depth, potentially a starter in free agency still for the other guard spot, so you can go into the draft saying we don't have any dire needs here. Like we can start this offensive line, but if we can get this certain guy at this certain pick, he can be our starter. But so then in the first round, my idea is I want an edge rusher in the first round.
Mhm.
I don't love the tackles in this class for long-term tackle solutions. And this is the tough part. You just got Ben Johnson going to year two of Caleb. You're hoping you're not picking this high again for a long time. So
Yeah.
you need to capitalize on this pick, in my mind, with a premier position. And that means left tackle, edge rusher. Those are really the two spots I'm interested in for that 10 pick. So I'm looking at the tackle class. I'm going like Will Campbell. Yeah, like I like a lot of it, but there's some questions there. Armand Membao. There's some questions there. I like his athleticism. I love his profile. He reminds me of Darnell Wright with the way he's built and the way he moves, but I'm not sure how much he can play left side. I won't get those answers. I'm sure the Bears will get answers about that, so maybe they can get comfortable with that. But when I'm looking at that, I'm going like all these tackles I have some questions with. Josh Simmons, I'd love if it weren't for the knee injury, but that scares me. Um, so I'm looking at edge rusher then, and I'm like, Shamar Stewart, Dennis Allen's gonna love him. He fits the profile, but that's not. He has like 2.5 sacks in his college career. It's
Yeah.
just a really
Yeah.
hard sell.
His RAS is like almost a perfect score, but his production just
Mhm.
didn't quite mirror that. And but
Yeah,
Poles loves RAS.
he does. He does. And then there's like, Mike Green and James Pierce and their off-field issues. I think will be a non-starter for the Bears, even though I've
Yeah.
been like pounding the table for James Pierce for like a
You've been a
month
Pierce
now.
guy.
It
Yeah.
just I don't the more I'm hearing, the more I think it's not gonna happen. Then I get to Michael Williams out of Georgia. And I'm like, man, this guy's advanced stats suck. But I turn on the tape and I see, oh well, that's because he's playing a ton of three technique at 250 pounds.
Is he like Leonard Floyd 2.0?
I think he has a deeper pass rush bag than Leonard did coming out of college.
Okay.
Because Leonard played linebacker mostly at college, but Michael Williams is playing a lot of interior D line, which is probably making his stats look pretty rough. But on tape, when he's getting those opportunities out at edge, I think he looks really nice. So that's kind of where my head is for 10 right now. And then, I'd like to
Okay.
see a guard at 39, and a defensive tackle at 41, and then probably a running back at 72, and then just O-line the rest of the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
If,
Yeah.
if you can trade down anywhere in there, go for it because this offensive guard and D tackle class is really deep. I believe in the talent you can get in a trade down.
I know we got to wrap up, but real quick, I did want to ask you about Tyler Booker before we run out of time.
Yeah.
A lot of infatuation with Tyler Booker. His RAS is not aligning with what Poles normally does. Do you feel like the Bears have any shot at him? 10 feels like a reach, but then he might not be there at 39. Is he just kind of in that no man's land where the Bears don't really have a shot to realistically get him?
I think it's just a dice roll. I mean, maybe it's like 40-60. He's there at 39. Maybe it's
Mhm.
50-50. Maybe it's 30-70. It's tough to really say because what I've been saying about Booker for the last few weeks, and I think the combine kind of verified this, was he's going to be scheme dependent. There
Mhm.
are only going to be certain teams that are interested in Tyler Booker. Buffalo Bills will be one of them. And they're picking what, 29? So that makes
Mhm.
like there is a chance that he is taken right there, right before the second round starts. But ultimately, we tend to see these guys who are more scheme dependent fall because half the teams in
Yeah.
the league just aren't interested in them.
Off the board. Yep.
Yeah, like the guy who I've compared Tyler Booker to, who I think Booker is cleaner than, like quite a bit cleaner than coming out of college, but is Osiris Torrance. He was 2 years ago. He was talked about as a first round pick early in the process, then like maybe an early second round pick. In mocks, I don't think he ever went after 50 until draft
Wow.
day, and he drops to like I want to say 59 or 60 something because he was very similar to Tyler Booker, a gap scheme dependent guard. Those guys just only so many teams need them.
It's good insight, man. It's
Yeah,
good
thank
insight.
you very much. I wanted to, what that clip that we played at the beginning, what year was that from?
That was week 15 of this season. I was very frustrated.
Oh shit, that's funny, dude.
Yeah, this is my third year doing draft analysis, and it finally cracked in me of like I can't just keep paying attention to the draft only. Like,
Yeah, yeah. I wanna pay attention to meaningful games.
Well, thank you so much for being on. Where can people find you, read your stuff, see your stuff, hear your stuff, follow you? Let us know about all that.
yeah. So on Twitter, it's at Buckiss Stats, like Dick Buckiss, just because my favorite player is Dick Buckiss, as you can see. But I've got a YouTube channel under the same name. You can also find me on ontapsportsnet.com. I do the Bears on Tap podcast for them, anywhere you can find podcasts. And I also do an NFL gambling podcast called the Shaving Points Podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Samir, any final thoughts before we skip out of here?
No, this was great. Thank you, Quinten, again for joining us. Learned a lot. Awesome insight, and obviously we'd love to have you back. Anytime you want to talk O-line, we're happy to
Yep.
listen and
Thanks for having
get
me on,
educated.
guys. I appreciate it. Had a great time.
Thank you. For Samir Patel, I'm Chirag Rathod. We are the Bears in the neighborhood. We are the Bears in the neighborhood, excuse me, with special guest today, Quinten Krzysko, and we will catch you all next week.